as I told you, we're trying to bring you different perspectives. And I've been long enough in this industry, the startup industry, to know that sometimes the people who have been early on and who have been going through the up and down of entrepreneurship, can be the one who can share a lot. By the way, before I forget, there are some available chairs over there. So if you want to enjoy or hear, I know some people are standing, but if you want to take a chair, enjoy. So I want to hear from you because you've been around for a while. Unfortunately, spoiler alert, the end was not that happy for your company, but I want to learn what you've learned in Voice AI. First things first, give us like an overview of Ascensia, the company you've been founded in Voice AI related to lab 8 years ago.
Well, is this working? Yeah. First of all, Cedric, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to share what I can share today, a part of my journey with Ascensia. To give you a little bit of background, my background is purely in the pharmaceutical industry. I worked in sales and business development in big pharma companies for the first 5 years. Then I did a really unusual career shift, going back to academia after 5 years in industry, and decided to become a scientist, and very ambitious, very young, trying to find a new innovative therapies for the world. But then after 3 years of doing that, I just was really shocked by how scientists do scientific research. A lot of scientists actually do a lot of experiments in the lab, but they actually don't record anything. And that's as simple as that. They basically busy with their hands. They work in a very sterile and clean environments. So I thought I would love to change this and make it more, help scientists to be more productive and produce higher quality scientific research. And this is where I kind of embarked on the journey of building an AI voice assistant for scientific labs. Yeah, so that's pretty much about me.
And maybe so
I'll start.
people realize like what was the Voice AI tech stack kind of ecosystem back in 2018, 2020, right? So it's like
Yeah. Pretty much we wasn't that much of a that advanced technology, let's say. We were basically benchmarking different kind of basic speech to text and text to speech models from Microsoft Azure and also Google. And they were very terrible when it comes to scientific terminology. So you have very common use cases for voice and the medical setup where you have patients and doctors. This is quite well established compared to scientific terminologies. It's completely different set of language, completely different terminologies. And that was very challenging at the beginning because scientists were basically trying to speak something and then more than half of it is completely wrong and they have to correct everything. So that was quite challenging for us at the beginning, yeah.
was that the main reason, you know, going fast forward to the end, it's like when looking backwards, because you had your up and downs, and we could spend more time, of course, but we want to really focus on Voice AI, what you've learned, and what you've seen. Were you able to embrace this LLM based, speech models recently, or did that not even change and solve your problem?
We had the chance to use a little bit of LLM capabilities, not extensively, especially that we worked with big pharma companies, so everything has to be locally installed on-prem installations. So back then, when the LLM came up into the picture, there was really a big question mark. Why do you use LLMs? Where the data goes? How do you process our data, etc.? So that made it a bit challenging. But for example, one of the interesting things that we used it for was the intent recognition. That made it way easier because at the beginning we had to actually ask the scientist to speak very specific commands to the AI voice assistant to do a specific job. And of course, when it comes to natural language and speaking, everybody's saying different things, and sometimes it's very difficult. So we had to force the users to say specific things at some point. And also building voice in the lab is a very, very tricky business, I would say. A lot of challenges.
Name a few.
You have got the noise in the lab. People are continuously speaking to each other in the lab as well. So you don't want to have this continuous recording of the voice, right? So you always need to trigger it, or you need to build like a user voice recognition on top of that, which is also was not an easy thing to do back then. You have terminologies that you need to build your models on and fine tune the models on these very specific terminologies. In the lab environment, it's very difficult. There is no, also in science in general, there is no standardized way of saying things. And there's lack of actually um, data of voice data of how actually even some scientists don't know how to pronounce some specific scientific terminology, so every scientist is pronouncing things differently as well. So there are so many things around that was very difficult. And the personas of the scientists, like people say, people perceive me a bit weird to speak to this thing in the lab and not being social with people. So there's another layer to that as well.
That we're going to double down on that before. And we see that the tank has changed. So you've mentioned a few challenges, like identifying who's speaking. For the people in the room, that's called diarization. We have some company like Pianot AI, shameless plug, French company, co-founders in Toulouse, where I'm from. But no matters, it's very like one of the top top listed, on Hugging Face, like open source library. Check it if you're interested. Audio enhancement, AI acoustics, that is sponsoring this event, is also helping in that direction. But to your last point, is it just a tech layer? So do you believe like today, with all the available technology, you could make it, you could make the same use case a success, or there are things like people in the lab, like the human part of it, which is still, that it still makes this use case an early, early use case for voice AI?
Yeah, there were like the tech was part of the like one piece of the puzzle, but there was also many other things, like starting in 2018, like in a pharma industry, which is very old and traditional. That's also a whole different element as well. So the thing is that we didn't build a full, like a standalone product. We built an add-on technology. So the idea is that we integrate our voice technology to the existing databases that are used to record and keep recording of the scientific data, so the scientists can be our and as a form of mobile application. So basically we will take away or fetch the data from the database, let the scientists access the data by voice, capture all the details, and then send it back again to the database. And there are so many tricky things about this. You work with like a dinosaur software that is installed on-prem, that was not updated for the last 10 years, for example. And then there are like challenges with the IT teams. It's very difficult to demo just the app and pilot it. There's another element that a lot of labs actually still documenting. Until this moment, everything's documented on paper. So when you tell them that, oh, you can use voice in your lab, they're like, seems like I'm coming from year 3000, So that's another element. And then, people were very skeptical about the technology in 2018. Everybody's like, I speak to Siri and Alexa, and no, they don't understand anything. How do you actually build voice around that? So there are a lot of tricks to kind of navigate the tech that was available out there to build your product, which we did quite well. But then there's also an element that you are one of the first mover in the market. So back then we were like 3 people in the whole world doing voice for the lab. And when you're building this kind of a new product, there is no a blueprint like for the product, right? It's not like you're building a CRM and knows what are the basic features of a CRM, and then you top it on some automations and designs or whatsoever, right? So there's so much trial and error to build something like this, and each company of these companies actually had their own way of building voice for the lab and their own interface.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that the first mover advantage is rarely, the case. It's more like the last mover advantage, because all the money spent by your competitors have educated the market. Before we take some question, like briefly, because you've been at the forefront of this, but when you look at voice AI, there were one element that we discussed, preparing this around multimodal. That you think that's an area that is still to be explored, interacting with voice, but having a different, answer on a screen or something. Remember what we talked about?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. This is something that I was actually thinking about because, well, right now I ended up working with the competitor of my startup company. It's called Lab Voice in the US. And one of the things that came across is actually the fact that there usually when you develop voice, it's either speech to text, and there's an assumption of there's no physical interaction. You're just talking to something that doesn't exist, but there is no proper uh, voice interface for an application or for a screen, right? So you cannot interact with an app with voice, for example. And usually scientists, they are very skeptical. They don't want to just talk with voice, and they don't trust it. They want to see this visual interaction as well, seeing what's being said. Is it recording correctly? Is it actually understanding what I'm saying? And I just realized that there's no actually proper user interface for voice interface for apps, and also debugging voice applications. It's quite tricky, and also stress testing voice application was a terrible process as well. Yeah.
Before and not before, it's like I promised some questions time. I can have more, but wanted to open to the audience. Yes, 2 over there, 3 over there. First hand first.
Thanks very much, resonating experience. Thanks for sharing. What would be the biggest lesson that you've learned that helped you in your next step? Thank you.
The biggest there are so many lessons, man. I would say from my own experience is basically making mistakes. Like just especially as a first mover, I think making mistakes is quite a scary thing to do, especially when you're doing a startup. You are really careful. But I think the best thing to do in building a startup is just to do as much mistakes as possible at the beginning to learn quickly and actually move forward. So that's, I would say, the best lesson.
Good one.
Another tough question. You said there's no standard interface for voice apps. So if you could try and imagine one for us, what would you place on a standard voice interface? Does it look like for you?
Oof. Well, I'm not a technical person, but I think it's just like the simplicity of, for example, interacting with an app. Like, for example, we were building a voice application, right, for scientific labs. So it would be very handy if you can interact with the app to ask about, or to guide you throughout the app. Because, for example, at some point we're building so many functionalities that the users are not familiar with, right? So it will be very nice to basically interact with, guide me through a tour, take me through a tour, or tell me which button should I use on the screen, or where to go, etc., etc. That would be a very interesting voice interface with the application. Yeah.
I have the privilege of having listened to your pitch before, the time there was a startup, and I remember the trade-off was having to look at the beaker and the experiment, and at the same time having to write the notes. It was a very lovely problem. I was super curious as before to know, after the introduction of this voice AI app, how did the user behavior really change when you kind of were experimenting with it? And I'm also a little bit more curious, perhaps maybe if the voice was augmented with more agentic process, or was it more of an efficiency thing or more of a time-saving challenge that you faced in the lab environment?
So the first part is the behavior change was quite difficult. We had two types of personas in the lab. You have the tech-savvy scientists who are really crazy about the app and they really love to try it and they don't mind if it's making mistakes, and the other ones that are like, I don't have time for that, I don't want to, and this is the majority of the scientists, unfortunately. So that's one thing. And then the other part is it was a multiple things. So there was an element of time saving, because scientists basically, they really don't like spending time on manual documentation basically. There's another element of having high quality of data, because in my opinion, right now, there's a lot of AI in drug discovery, but I'm very skeptical about that because there is no proper reproducible scientific data out there, properly documented. Yeah, so these are mainly the main things, and of course, productivity gains for the scientific teams in general.
So yeah, we're running out of time, but like short question.
Yeah, text-to-speech models have progressed leaps and bounds in like last year or so. Like, are you guys trying to like leverage that to like enhance your product, or like are they your competitors, or like how do you guys look at it?
From which sense again? Can you
like all the text-to-speech models that we have access to? We are like really impressed as to like how they have progressed in the last year. Like
we didn't really have the chance to put that much effort into using these different kind of models, unfortunately. Yeah. So we used some LLMs just for basic things like intent recognition, but nothing really explicitly in speech to text or something. At the very beginning, we actually built our own models for scientific terminology using synthetic data. That's what we did at the starting point. Yeah.
Ahmed, thank you very much for
Thanks
this
for having
time,
me.
for all your answers. Yep. Thank you. Pretty cool.